Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, our today's session is on notes taking. Well, before I go for the details of today's session, I would like to share a review of the previous session. As far as our previous session was concerned, it was mainly divided into two parts. Part 1 of the previous session was on writing an outline, whereas part 2 was on using a dictionary. In part 1, we started talking about what is an outline, and then I shared with you main types of outline. I discussed the definitions and characteristics of macro and micro outlines and how they are used in different situations. I also gave you some sample examples of these outlines. I also talked about differences in macro and micro outlines, and I told you that macro outlines are comparatively simple and brief outlines. They are precised. Most of the time, single words are used for sketching each of the part or sub-part of these outlines. In comparison to these, micro outlines are more complicated and more complex type of outlines. They are more detailed as well. In micro outlines, sentences and longer phrases and clauses are used to write outlines. Then I moved on to the discussion on the advantages of using an outline. While talking about macro type of outlines, I also introduced the idea of clustering. I shared with you what is clustering and how it can be used as an effective tool for writing your outlines. Then I talked about what makes an outline a good or a bad outline, and I shared with you sample good and bad outlines on the same topic. Towards the end of this part of the session, we talked about what is the process of moving from a written outline to the practical writing of an essay or a composition. With this, in that session, we moved on to the use of dictionary, and as the second part was regarding using a dictionary, I started with the authority of a dictionary. Then I explained differences in British and American English and the use of dictionaries with reference to this particular issue. Idea of desk dictionaries and how they are helpful for students was presented, and which type of dictionaries to be bought was also discussed. The core part of this session on using a dictionary was related to what a dictionary will tell you. In this particular part, we explored how a dictionary, apart from providing meanings of words as we take it generally, the only use of a dictionary, how a dictionary provides many other things, how it tells a lot more about a word. I shared with you, with the help of a detailed discussion and examples, that a dictionary provides you the knowledge of what part of speech a word is, what is its origin, that is from which language it has been borrowed, what are the synonyms and antonyms of that particular word, and what is its usage in language. Towards the end of this session on using a dictionary, we had some exercises on how to use a dictionary effectively. With this, now that I have shared the review of the previous session, I would like you to come to the current session. The current session is on note taking or notes taking. What is note taking or notes taking? This is what we would talk about. With this, we would move on to the types of note taking, and I would basically discuss three general formats that are used: the cornell format, the mind map format, and standard organized outline format. With this, we would move on to advantages of note taking, and we would discuss how they can be used in situations where students have to prepare for their exams, for example. Towards the end of the session, I would also talk about how to take notes. what can be the tips for that, what can be the rules that you can apply while taking notes. And at the end of the session, we would have some activities and exercises to practice how we can take notes effectively and efficiently. Dear students, to introduce what note-taking means, I would say note-taking is the process or the practice of recording information captured from another resource or source. By taking notes, the writer records the essence of the information, freeing his or her mind from having to recall everything. Continuing on what is note-taking, I would say note-taking involves making a permanent written record of main points and supporting details to which one may refer later. Although note-taking most commonly is used to record oral presentations, note-taking strategies may also be used to record notes from written resources. This implies then that you can take notes of my sessions or lectures that you have with you, because when you would prepare for your exams, since at that time you would not have ample time to go through each lecture in detail. So if you would have taken notes of all of these sessions, it would really help you to go through those quickly to be ready to appear for your exams. It also means that as distant learners, because a lot of learning process is to take place through your independent reading, when you would be reading materials, if you take notes of all that you read, it would help you revise that for examination purposes or for writing your assignments, etc. Note-taking involves recording ideas and facts that you learn in class or in any teaching learning situation to help you remember and use them later. The 5 R's of note-taking are record, reduce, recite, reflect, and review. We will talk about these in a while in detail. An important question is, what are the purposes of note-taking strategies and why they should be used? Well, notes are not just collections of information. The information must be recorded correctly and in an organized manner in order to be of use at a later time. Note-taking strategies then are designed to improve one's ability to take more accurate, more complete, and more organized notes. Note-taking strategies are not just for students. Some of the strategies may be used by instructors for the purposes of improving lecture structure and enhancing student understanding of material. The strategies may also be applied in the workplace. So, note-taking strategies that you would learn today would not only help you in your academic life, but also later on in your professional life at your workplaces. Well, why note-taking strategies are to be used? I would say note-taking skills help one to pay better attention to an oral presentation or written document because they keep the individual active. In academic context, good note-taking skills aid in understanding of material, effective presentation for exams, and completion of assignments. They, of course, also improve reading comprehension. Note-taking strategies are broadly applicable to a variety of tasks and subjects. Once they are introduced and mastered, the strategies often become second nature to the individual and therefore don't require repeated work to use, unlike some of the memory strategies. तो एक दफ़ा अगर आप सीख लेते हैं consciously how to make your notes, it really helps not only in reading independently, but also for preparing your examinations and for making your assignments. It also helps later on in professional lives. In our professional lives, we have to read a lot of documents and to take notes of what is presented in them so that we could recall all that information, and when needed, we could quickly go through those notes and use that information. Thus, notes-taking strategies are important to learn. However, specifically talking about notes as a study tool, I would say the following list would provide you a few reasons why note taking is an important activity. Number one, taking notes will help you to extend your attention span. When reading or listening, your mind may tend to wander off. You might be inclined to think about work, money, or relationships, or anything else, any kind of mental flight you can have. It is quite easy for other aspects of your life to pop into your head while you are listening to a lecture or while you are reading. Taking notes helps keep you focused on your subject area and to the task at hand. Secondly, taking notes will help you to remember what you have heard or read. We learn more effectively when we use multiple senses and multiple activities. When note taking, we are using listening, reading, any of these, and writing skills. Sometimes we are using all the three: listening, reading, and writing skills. So right now when I am talking to you through this session, if you are taking notes, actually you are doing multiple activities, which means you are listening to me, you are also reading what is given on the slide, and you are writing. All this implies that this multiple level of activities and this involvement of multiple senses, it increases your ability to understand and to learn. Also, by writing down notes, you are paraphrasing the lecture or reading material into your own words and into a format that you are more likely to understand when you review the notes. And as an adult learner, you are more likely to remember what you have heard or read if you take an active part in your learning. Rather than being a passive listener or reader, note-taking makes you an active learner. The notes you produce are your own work and are a visible reminder of the effort that you have put into the course. This in itself can be a motivational factor for your study. Continuing on notes as a study tool, I would say that the third advantage of taking notes is that note-taking helps you organize the ideas that you are learning about. Good notes should arrange topics into easy-to-review chunks of information that are clear and well-referenced. This is important if you are using your notes to review for an examination or for as a starting point in an assignment. It may be tempting not to take notes and to just sit back and listen to an interesting lecture or to become engrossed in an interesting reading. However, there are certain disadvantages of this situation. The disadvantage of these strategies is that at the end of the lecture or reading, you may only have a vague recollection of the important and sometimes accessible issues. If you can recall, when I talked to you about efficient use of memory, actually I shared with you that a very little part of what you listen to is retained by you. Same goes with reading. All that you read does not stay with you, only some part that you pay very conscious attention to is retained. In such cases, if you have not taken the notes, the case can be that you may have to reread, which is sometimes time consuming and sometimes tedious. The taking of effective notes while you're reading is an important academic activity that helps you to concentrate, stimulates your ability to recall, and helps you to be organized. And while you are taking notes in that process, because you are also trying to comprehend all that, and in the process of comprehension, you paraphrase it and you put it in easy words for yourself, it becomes easy for you to have an access to that, I would say, paraphrased or translated to easy version of information that you originally read. There are many other advantages of note-taking, but Yoki has mentioned two main values of making notes. First, making notes or taking notes requires active participation in the learning process. Please also notice the difference between note-taking and note-making. To take notes suggests a passive procedure of recording words verbatim, like a secretary taking dictation. You may replace, if you like, the word taking with making. To make notes demands your full attention. You must be alert to the pattern of thought, its direction and development, and you must distinguish between what is important and what is not. This active involvement is what makes note-making difficult. It is also what makes note-making valuable. At this point, I would also like to make clear that I have used the term note-taking as a general word that is an equivalent to note-making, and since in Pakistani context note-taking is used more frequently by the students, I have preferred to stick to the term, though the implied meaning also is note-making. The second important value of making notes is that they are used when the time comes to review the material and relate it all together, gives them importance. So the value of making notes is that you can have them prepared pre-hand, and when, for example, you have to do an assignment or you have to do a project or you have to prepare for exams, you can use those. Notes help you recall and summarize information, and they help you understand the material in the total context rather than as separate series of lectures or chapters. Note-taking or making notes is such an integral part of academic activities that many linguists, researchers, writers and educationists have suggested advantages of note-taking strategies. So a few more advantages as discussed by other people are here. Note-taking skills help one to pay better attention to an oral presentation or written document because they keep the individual active, and in academic contexts, good note-taking skills aid in understanding of material, effective preparation of exams and completion of assignments. And as I have already said, they help in improving your reading comprehension. This naturally leads us to the question how to take notes in an effective way, or how to make your notes in an effective way. Well, here are some tips for making notes from reading. If you look at the heading, tips for taking notes from readings. So here I am specifically focusing on you as distant learners, where you have to read a lot independently. How you would read that and take notes of that, out of that, and would make your notes for your examinations or other academic purposes, this is what I'm going to discuss. Understand what you're looking for in the reading. So before you start reading, be clear on what you are looking for in the reading. What is the purpose of reading? Are you looking to gain a general understanding, or you are searching for specific information or support for an argument? So you need to be clear about your purpose of reading. Once you're clear about the purpose of your reading, it would become easier for you to focus on that particular area and to prepare notes that would be more focused. A well-structured reading should begin by outlining the main premise, argument or ideas in the first few sentences, and certainly in the first paragraph. Pick out the main premise and write it down. If you understand it, you may read the examples given to support it. Never include examples in your notes. Only include the facts. Avoid experiences and anecdotes where possible. So I would like to emphasize that when you are taking notes, or while reading you are making notes of the material that you read, it is very important that you only note down for yourself the facts. The facts and the figures, I would say. Do not include detailed examples. If you need to include an example at all, instead of adding all the details, only write a clue that would guide you towards that example. In the same way, also avoid experiences, anecdotes, jokes, etc. that are shared to make some idea clear in a piece of writing. You do not need to have those when you are preparing your notes. If at all you need something, you can have a clue that would remind you of that. Dear students, on this slide again we would continue with tips for taking notes from readings. Rowntree outlines what he calls SQ3R approach to reading and note-taking from text. If you remember, at the outset of the session, I had a reference to survey, question, read, recall and review, and I said that in a while we would talk about that. So I think now this is the time when we would talk about it. And actually Rowntree has suggested that students should use the following activities in order to get the most from a reading in the most efficient way. Number one is survey. What does survey mean? It means flip through the chapter or book and note the layout. First and last chapters or paragraphs are also to be noted. Also look at the headings that are used. Familiarize yourself with the reading. Once you have done the survey of a piece of writing that you are supposed to read and make notes of, you can move on to the second point, that is question. Ask questions. In this case, you would ask questions to yourself about the way the reading is structured and think about the questions you will need to keep in mind while reading. Think about whether or not you think the book or the reading material is relevant or if it is current or not, which means it is recent or not. Also check whether it suits the purpose of your study or not. The more you would be clear about the answers of these questions, the more you would also be clear about taking notes about that particular piece of reading or about that particular book, because it would help you decide how detailed notes you need or how brief or precise notes you need to take from a particular piece of reading or a book. The third stage is to read. Read actively but quickly, looking for the main points of the reading, and don't take any notes at this stage. You might want to read through twice quickly. This is just to skim through it. Later on you would decide whether you want to go into detail and you want to take notes of it or not. The fourth step or the fourth stage that Rowntree has pointed out is recall. This is the time when write down the main points of the reading and any really important facts and opinions that help support the main points. Also record the bibliographic details. So this is the time point where you take notes or you make your notes based on your survey, the nature of questions regarding that structure of that study and the reading that you have done. Once you have prepared your notes, review. This is the last stage. Review means repeat the first 3 steps over and make sure you haven't missed anything. The first 3 steps, that are survey, question and reading itself of the text. Repeat these quickly to see that you have not missed any point, and at this point you might like to finalize your notes and reread your notes or write down how the material you have just covered relates to your question or task. So this is the stage where you give a final shape to your notes. Well, dear students, this leads to another question, and the crucial question is, what should be the form of notes? The form in which you make notes depends upon the subject of the course and whether they are from a book or a lecture. The most common and versatile form is probably an outline indicating logical divisions and developments of important points. In the previous session, I shared with you how to make an outline. So all the information that I shared on how to develop your skills of making an outline can also be used in this case, where you would use an outline if you opt for an outline to take notes. However, some students find a summary or a series of questions and answers as a satisfactory record of information, and they would record all their information in the form of notes by using questions or a kind of a summary. Although the outline form is recommended, you may want to experiment to determine the kind that best suits your personality and purpose. So I would say it varies from person to person. It also varies from topic to topic, course to course, and material to material, that is to be read or listened to and then to be transformed in the form of notes. This leads us towards different types of note taking. Three types of note taking are very common: the Cornell format, the mind map format, and the standard organized outline format. Well, I would say that you should choose the format that feels most comfortable and will allow you to record the subject matter the best. It's a matter of personal choices as well. I would introduce each one of these in some detail so that you could have some idea of how each of these is to be used. But it does not mean that you have to use all the three necessarily. You can make a choice of your own depending upon your needs and depending upon your choices and preferences. The first format is the Cornell format. It is based on the 5 R's of note taking, that is record, reduce, recite, reflect and review. Well, by record what I mean is record your information as normal. The second step is reduce. In the Cornell format, reduce ideas and facts on the left side of the page. The third step is recite. That is, recite your recall column where you have written your recall points. Fourthly, reflect on the notes. Think about the notes critically, brood over them for a while, I would say. And finally, review all notes for 10 minutes every week. This means frequently going back to your notes and reviewing them. By the way, reviewing notes helps in many ways. It helps you to remember them. It helps you, number 2, to understand them in a far better way. And the third advantage is that while you review, sometimes you think of some more ideas that you want to incorporate. So you can incorporate these ideas at that time point. The second important format that is used for note taking or note making is the mind map format. Mind maps are diagrammatic ways of organizing key ideas from lectures and texts which emphasize the interconnection of concepts and illustrate the relative hierarchy of ideas from titles to main concepts to supporting details. So the use of these diagrammatic ways of organizing key ideas as mind maps is also very helpful when it comes to notes taking. Because they are diagrammatic, they have the potential to capture a lot of information on a single page. They then take less effort in this case, and they help show the conceptual links between ideas and allows for additional material to be added without the need to crowd the page. By using arrows and lines, you can link up different words. If you can remember from the previous session where I talked about outlines, and then I shared with you how you can take one word and you can cluster around it, the clustering activity. In the same way, in mind mapping, you can keep on adding things and you can show their links and connections with the help of lines or arrows. And because they typically feature keywords and phrases, they allow for the same kind of review that is facilitated by the Cornell notes. So they also have all the advantages that Cornell notes format would have. My dear students, here on this slide you can see a sample of mind mapping. Now let us suppose that your main topic on which you are mind mapping, on which you are reading something or on which you are listening to something and you are taking notes of this. This is the mind map of that. What you can see that at the center, note-taking skills is placed. Now because all that you are reading or that you are listening to is related to this one main topic, place it at the center and circle it. Now what you can see that the writer of this note-taking activity has branched out, 3 branches at the top and 2 at the bottom of this note-taking skills square, and each of these branch has been further sub-branched. 3 main areas: why note-taking skills, how to store and organize note-taking skills, and how to use visual tools for note-taking skills are covered in the 3 top branches. The 2 branched areas at the bottom provide us information about general tips on note-taking skills and specific tips on note-taking skills. Well, to quickly recap, this would also help us in understanding note-taking skills as well, because right now this is our topic. So why note-taking skill? Because they are a part of learning process. 2, they extend attention span. 3, they help you remember material. And 4, organize ideas. Well, you can see as I am discussing with you, I am talking to you, I am using complete sentences. However, in mind mapping, only phrases are used. Complete sentences are not to be used. The second branch, that is to store and organize notes, it has 2 sub-branches: large pieces of paper, folder storage system. So how would you store manually large pieces of paper, and what would be the system of folder storage when it comes to notes taking? This is what is presented here. And the third branch at the top here shows visual tools that can be used for notes taking skills. And again, you can see that instead of writing a complete sentence, use visual tools is given here, and 2 sub branches, linear notes and spray diagrams, is branched out of this to show 2 different possibilities. Later on, as the writer would write on all this, he or she can expand on each of these ideas that are the main ideas, and then within each main idea on the sub ideas that are presented. Since note taking is placed here at the center for making this mind map, I would say that this gives some scope to the creator of this mind map to expand this mind map in any form or any shape he or she would like to, as he or she would go through the material on which the notes are to be made. So you see, 2 branches here you can see: general tips on note-taking skills and specific tips on note-taking skills. General tips are again categorized as 4: read and listen critically, what to note, summarize, be critical. And each one is further subcategorized, as you can see. In the same way, some specific tips are also given for note-taking skills, and they are divided into 2 parts: from lectures and from reading. If you can recall, just a few minutes back, I talked to you about note-taking skills from reading specially. And if you look at all this division, it covers almost all the same areas that I talked about. That from reading, when you take notes, specifically the tips for that are: know why you are reading, use organization clues of paragraphs, avoid examples. These were all the points that I talked about. And then I talked about SQ3R technique, which included survey, layout, question, that is structure or relevance, read, that is reading twice quickly, recall, that is note making time, and then enter, that is subtopic, where you would finally, you see, review all that. So you see, if you from the very beginning of my session would have been making a mind map of what we have been discussing so far, I would say that all this area I have covered for you, and you can see how it could have been mind mapped for yourself, or how you could have used a mind map to take notes of this one. If you have not done it yourself, later on you can once again listen to the lecture, and while listening to this you can draw your own mind map to see how successfully you can make your mind map. You can place that mind map in comparison to this mind map to see how successfully and how clearly you have made your map. With this, I bring you to the next, and that is the third format of taking notes. This is the most used format. This is the commonly used format, and it is called standard organized outline format. If you look at this outline, following all the rules of as we did when I was talking to you in the previous session regarding making an outline, this whole note-taking process is done. So when you are taking notes according to a standard organized outline, this is how you would follow: title, then the first main point, and then the same as I discussed with you, that the sub-point within the first point would be indented, first sub-point. Within that, further sub-details are to be indented every time when the point becomes smaller and a part of the bigger point. This is how the same sequence is to be followed. You can continue in the same manner with differing number of subpoints, facts and details as seen necessary, and then you can summarize your notes at the end. Well, when it comes to making notes, the most important consideration in making notes is what to write down and what not to. This is the question of judging the relevance of what is to be included or what is to be excluded. A few sketchy notes reflect a failure to fully understand the development and organization of the material. On the other hand, I would say notes that are too complete, they fail to distinguish between essential information and subordinate ideas and examples. This too makes review difficult. At this point, I would like to add that if your notes are very sketchy, it means you have missed out a lot of information that may be necessary and that you may need while preparing for your exams or while doing an assignment or a project based on these notes. On the other hand, if you have taken too detailed notes, sometimes, out of experience, I would say that sometimes students would take notes in such a way that they would become a replica of the original text. कि जितना अगर 10 सफ़े पढ़ के उस पे नोट्स लेने हैं तो जो नोट्स बनाएंगे वो भी 10 सफ़ों के बने हुए होंगे. So you see, the purpose of taking notes would be lost somewhere on the way. And because the purpose of taking notes is to facilitate remembering all that you have read or you have listened to, and to facilitate to consult all that information later on at any time point quickly, speedily and with less effort. And if you make too lengthy notes, too complicated notes, in itself it becomes a complication and it needs maybe more time for reading and understanding than the original reading material or the original lecture or something that you listen to. So, if you remember that the purpose of notes is to guide you carefully through the course, to aid your thinking by setting out the main points, and to remind you at later time of the development and relationship of essential ideas, you should have a fairly adequate guide to what should be recorded in your notes and what should be avoided or skipped. Briefly, I would say precision and balance is the key towards making good notes. Continuing on making notes, I would say it is also necessary, especially during lectures, to decide and to write rapidly. As far as rapid writing is concerned, regular note-taking practices should stimulate the use of some sort of abbreviation systems, especially when it comes to listening to lectures. Common symbols such as the following can be used. For example, re and is equal to, greater than, lesser than. They are the signs that are used for showing concerning and equal to, etc. So you can create your own set of such signs and symbols or abbreviations that you can use in your notes. However, a word of caution that I would like to give here is that create a set of these abbreviations and then stick to those symbols, signs and abbreviations. Do not use varied abbreviations, for example, for different words in different sets of notes, because it would lead towards confusion and chaos, and you would be caught up, you would not be clear what exactly you meant when you wrote that. Students, here is chart that would show you effective notes taking process. The whole process of taking notes is made clear on the chart. If you look at it, at the leftmost top corner, number 1, block number 1 says purpose of taking notes. Number 2, that is the right top corner, before the lecture. Number 3, during the lecture. And number 4, after the lecture. Well, it is also clear here that as previously I focused particularly on taking notes while reading, here I am specially focusing on taking notes while listening to a lecture. So while you listen to my lecture, this is the whole process that is to be followed to take notes. Number 1, the purpose of note taking. Well, be clear about why you are taking notes, what is the purpose of taking notes, because to be clear on the purpose of taking notes aids comprehension and retention. अगर आपको पता होगा कि आपका पर्पस क्या है तो it would help you understand in a better way and retain in a better way, आपको याद भी रहेगा. Outline of important points, clarification of ideas, source of review. आप इनमें से किस पर्पस के लिए नोट्स ले रहे हैं? Whether you want to have some comprehension of the general idea, whether you want to have important points, you want some clarification on something specific, or you are just using it as a review source. If you are clear about the purpose of your taking notes, it really helps you. Number 2, before the lecture. Before you listen to the lecture, if there are any relevant materials, read or skim that material or that text. Have a general overview of what it is. If there are any new terms and concepts, make yourself familiar with them. Notice if there is any material that is unclear to you, or there are any gaps of information or in your information. Try to bridge them up before you go for listening to a lecture. The third step towards effective note taking is that during the lecture, do the following. During the lecture, notice the structure and organization of the lecture. See how the lecture is organized and create your organization system of notes according to that. Secondly, notice the contents. Again, as I have already said, instead of quoting examples, instead of writing anecdotes or anything that is shared to explain, just focus on the contents, the facts, or the main materials, the core materials. The fourth effective note-taking technique or the part of the process is after the lecture. Once you have listened to the lecture and you have taken your notes, do an immediate review, because it helps you in understanding that you have gone right, and if there is any possibility of something that you have skipped, then you can notice that. Completion and retention are also important in this regard. Rewrite your notes if you have missed something, if you have skipped something while writing, as you are listening to, just to cope up, for example, with the pace of the speaker or the teacher. If you have just used some abbreviations or you have left some parts incomplete, rewrite the notes to complete them. Outline them and map them for yourself to give them a final form. Dear students, talking about effective notes taking requires what? I would say effective note taking requires recognizing the main ideas, number 1. Number 2, identifying what information is relevant to your task. And of course, it implies that the information that you do not find relevant, leave that. Number 3, having a system of note taking that works for you. You can use the Carnell method, you can use the mind mapping, or if you are convenient or comfortable with the standard outline, you can use that. Reducing the information to note and diagram format. जितना लंबा ओरिजिनल टेक्स्ट हो उतने ही लंबे नोट्स बना लेंगे तो it would be of no use. So reduce the information to note and diagram format. It helps you reduce. It helps you reduce the materials or the contents. Where possible, putting the information in your own words is very, very important. If you use paraphrasing, if you use your own words, it helps you understand better and it helps you understand your notes later on in a better way. Recording the source of the information. From wheresoever you have taken this information, write it on your notes. Document from where you have taken it. This really helps. This authentication helps. And if you in any case have to go back to that resource material, that reading material, or to that lecture, if it is a recorded lecture, it becomes easier. Well, dear students, here are some more notes-taking strategies that I would like to share with you. Some of these strategies, as they are taken from multiple sources, are the same as have already been shared. So I would go through those quickly, whereas there are some that are new, so I would spend more time in elaborating those. Read before taking notes. Simply it means while it is not necessary to read the entire chapter before taking notes, you must finish titled sections or long paragraphs before selecting main ideas and paraphrasing. It is difficult to know what to record unless you have enough information from which to choose. This means pre-read. Skim read, look at the diagrams, captions and major concepts before you start taking notes. Secondly, be prepared. Be prepared with paper and writing instrument of your choice. आपने जिस चीज़ पे भी लिखना है लेके अपना सामान तैयार करके बैठिए और फिर शुरू कीजिए. Reduce distractions. Sit at appropriate place. घर पे हैं तो किसी ऐसी जगह पे बैठिए जहाँ पर distraction कम हो. If you are working with your colleagues or working with your group of friends studying on the same course, even then, make an appropriate choice of your place before you listen to something or before you read something for taking notes, because it is a matter of concentration. Ensure that you are not hungry. Yes, it is just as an example added here. It means ensure that you are done with all the important requirements that may hinder your concentration while you are working on your notes. Don't take notes just for notes' sake. When I say don't take notes just for notes' sake, what I mean by that is think a minute about your material before you start making your notes. Don't take notes just to be taking notes. Take notes that will be of real value to you when you look over them later for doing your assignments or projects or for your examination, etc. Next point in how to take notes effectively or the note-taking strategies is know what to record. Identify major topics based on section headings. Try to pick out one major idea per paragraph along with a few supporting details. Look for words in bold prints or italics. Don't write down everything that you read or hear. Be alert and attentive to the main points. Concentrate on the meat of the subject and forget the trimmings. Basic चीजें सिर्फ उठाइए for taking notes. Start a new page for each new topic. This is important so that everything is not mixed up and is not haphazard. Be selective in what you record. Well, it might seem repetitive, but actually it is not, because when I say be selective in what you record, what I mean is notes should consist of keywords or very short sentences. As a speaker gets sidetracked, you can go back and add further information. Omit descriptions and full explanations. Keep your notes short and to the point. Condense your material so you can grasp it rapidly. Remember that the goal of note-taking is to produce a shortened version of the reading. This is a skill that improves with practice. A very important point in note-taking strategies is that use your own words. Information should be paraphrased before it is recorded in notes. The time spent trying to understand a passage and recording the main ideas in your own words is the single most important investment of time you can make. The chances of remembering are greater if the work is in your own words. So it's time saving as well, and of course it makes life easy as well because अपना लिखा हुआ आसानी से याद रहता है. You should usually use your own words but try not to change the meaning. अब अगर कोई word ऐसा है जिसका आपको लगता है कि if you would use a paraphrased form or if you would use a synonym, the real essence or the meaning would be lost, do not do that. If you quote directly, then quote from the author correctly. Also, you can use diagrams to support when you are writing in your own way. A word of caution in this is work quickly and efficiently. Note-taking needs not to be and should not be painful and time-consuming. Read, think, write and move on. It's a quick process. You're not supposed to brood over the materials for a long time. Use an appropriate form of organization. Select a form of organization that will permit quick and active recall of the main points and then stick to that. आपको जो वाला भी तरीका अच्छा लगता है, जो format भी अच्छा लगता है वो choose करें, but then the advice is stick to that. Do not keep on changing. This is the same point that have a uniform system, but the additional point in it is that have a uniform system of punctuation and abbreviation that will make sense to you. If you use a skeleton outline, show importance by indenting. And then I would say leave space. Leave lots of white space for later editions so that you can go back and add information as and when necessary. Don't worry about missing a point. Leave space and try to pick up the material you miss at a later date or at a later stage or at a later time point, either through reading, questioning or common sense. In this case, where you are distant learners, you can again play the recorded lecture and you can reach that point. Note any concepts you are not sure of so that you could have some clarity on them later on. A very important strategy for note-taking is that keep a record. Don't keep notes on oddly shaped pieces of paper. Keep notes in order and in one place. When possible, write down page numbers and book titles for you to reference if needed. By the way, have you noticed that I always number my slides? It really helps. Only take notes on one side of the paper. This is a neat way of working. Review after some time. Once you have taken the notes, shortly after making your notes, go back and rework with them. Reworking does not mean recopying them. It means if there is need for any additions, make them. If there is a need for some deletion, you can also do that. Remember, we forget very quickly. So, budget time for this vital step just as you do for the study itself. इसलिए notes को revise करने के लिए ज़रूर time रखें. Budget it for yourself. जिस तरह पढ़ना important है, study is important in the same way. Later on, looking at the notes that you prepare through that study activity is important if you want to perform good in your examinations or quizzes, etc. Review your notes periodically. This is the only way to achieve lasting memory. From time to time, keep on visiting these notes. Well, coming towards reading notes, I would say for practice in note making, outlining written material is the best way to begin. You have the text before you so that you can see the topic sentences, references, connectives and transitions. You have time to consider the relative importance of ideas and you can refer forward or backward in the text, all of which is impossible while listening to a lecture. What I mean by this is, जब आप note taking की practice शुरू करें, for doing that practice, well, you can start this with listening to lectures as well, because in case of recorded lectures, you can go back to that. Still, taking notes, the practice of that can be started with reading. It always helps because it's easy to flip back and forth the papers and to look at the materials. If you have skipped something, you can go back to that point easily. So in that case, it becomes easier for the reader to take notes. Once you have some practice, of course, you can use it for listening to lectures, both the recorded and the real life situations as well. With this, we move towards an activity on how to take notes or how to make notes. Well, here I have a small piece of text. We would read it together. You need to read to it and to listen to it, read it and listen to it carefully. And then at the end, I would ask you to do some note-making activity. The topic of this reading material is how children fail. Most children fail in school. For a great many, this failure is avowed and absolute. Close to 40% of those who begin high school drop out before they finish. For college, the figure is 1 in 3. Many others fail in fact, if not in name. They complete their schooling only because you have agreed to push them up through the grades and out of the schools, whether they know anything or not. There are many more such children than we think. If we raise our standards much higher, as some would have us do, we will find out very soon just how many there are. Our classrooms will bulge with kids who can't pass the test to get into the next class. Okay, before I go on to the next page, if you think that you have understood this part of the text and if you feel like you can take notes of it, it is again a matter of choice. Otherwise, when you read the next page as well, at that time point you can take notes of that. However, as a piece of advice, I would say quickly jot down the few important points out of this page before you move on. I continue with the text. But there is a more important sense in which almost all children fail, except for a handful who may or may not be good students. They fail to develop more than a tiny part of the tremendous capacity for learning, understanding and creating with which they were born and of which they made full use during the first 2 or 3 years of their lives. Why do they fail? They fail because they are afraid, bored and confused. They are afraid above all else of failing, of disappointing or displeasing the many anxious adults around them, whose limitless hopes and expectations for them hang over their heads like a cloud. They are bored because the things they are given and told to do in school are so trivial, so dull, and make such limited and narrow demands on the wide spectrum of their intelligence, capabilities, and talents. Before you move on to the next slide for the rest of the text, quickly take notes of the important points out of this. I continue reading the text. They are confused because most of the torrent of words that pours over them in school makes little or no sense. It often flatly contradicts other things they have been told and hardly ever has any relation to what they really know, to the rough model of reality that they carry around in their minds. How does this mass failure take place? What really goes on in the classroom? What are these children who fail doing? What goes on in their heads? Why don't they make use of more of their capacity? The book is the rough and partial record of a search for answers to these questions. It began as a series of memos written in the evenings to my colleague and friend Bill Hull, whose 5th grade class I observed and taught in during the day. Later, these memos were sent to other interested teachers and parents. A small number of these memos make up this book. They have not been much rewritten, but they have been edited and rearranged under 4 major topics: strategy, fear and failure, real learning, and how schools fail. Strategy deals with the ways in which children try to meet or dodge the demands that adults make on them in school. Fear and failure deals with the interaction in children of fear and failure and the effect of this on strategy and learning. Real learning deals with the difference between what children appear to know or are expected to know and what they really know. How schools fail analyzes the ways in which schools foster bad strategies, raise children's fears, produce learning which is usually fragmentary, distorted and short-lived, and generally fail to meet the real needs of children. These four topics are clearly not exclusive. They tend to overlap and blend into each other. They are, at most, different ways of looking at and thinking about the thinking and behavior of children. It must be made clear that the book is not about unusually bad schools or backward children. The schools in which the experiences described here took place are private schools of the highest standards and reputation. So till this point you can take your notes. You can actually continue the process of taking your notes. I continue on reading. With very few exceptions, the children whose work is described are well above the average in intelligence and are, to all outward appearances, successful and on their way to good secondary schools and colleges. Friends and colleagues who understand what I am trying to say about the harmful effect of today's schooling on the character and intellect of children and who have visited many more schools than I have, tell me that the schools I have not seen are not a bit better than those I have, and very often are worse. So now that if you have been through with the whole text and if you have been taking notes of the whole text, this is the time to draw your outline. If you think that you have missed out something, you can always go back to the beginning of the text. From here right through these 5 slides where I have presented the whole text, you can go through these again, and then I would like you to make some outline for yourself that would work as you can use an outline. As a matter of fact, if you feel like, you can use a mind map or Cornell format, and the purpose is to make your notes. Well, on the format of outline, here I have a single pager, I would say note taking outline for you. Look at the title. Here the title is given, How Children Fail. It is on one page that all those 4 pages are summarized. You can see under 3 main headings. Most children in school fail. Second one, why? Fail because afraid, bored and confused. The 3 main reasons. And how? Search for answers to the questions how all this takes place. Within each you can see the subcategorization. You can always use numbering for these as well. I have used bullets. High school 40%, college 30%, others in fact if not name completely fail, but because they are pushed to fail, and the question is, do they know anything? So I have used question marks as a sign for myself for the question. Whether they know anything or not is the real question. But more importantly, fail to develop full capacity for learning. I have underlined this as my main part of discussion for all this. So you see, taking notes in this way, where you organize all the ideas, it becomes easy when you later on come to this kind of notes or this kind of outline that you have prepared through those notes, and actually you can recall what the whole text is about. My dear students, with this we move to the second activity of today's session, and that is again on note taking. Because that is the topic of our today's session. What we are supposed to do is to read the following text quickly. You have 5 minutes time. As we would read it, you are supposed to take its notes as well. So basically you would be reading on what is written on the slides, and you would also be taking help from listening to me while I would be reading it out for you, and you would make your notes on this. So let's see what kind of notes you have at hand at the end of this activity. Coffee and its processing. The coffee plant, an evergreen shrub or small tree of African origin, begins to produce fruit 3 or 4 years after being planted. The fruit is hand gathered when it is fully ripe and a reddish purple in color. The ripened fruits of the coffee shrubs are processed where they are produced to separate the coffee seeds from their covering and from the pulp. 2 different techniques are in use, a wet process and a dry process. The wet process. First, the fresh fruit is pulped by a pulping machine. Some pulp still clings to the coffee, however, this residue is removed by fermentation in tanks. The few remaining traces of pulp are then removed by washing. The coffee seeds are then dried to a moisture content of about 12% either by exposure to the sun or by hot air dryers. If dried in a sun, they must be turned by hand several times a day for even drying. The dry process. In the dry process, the fruits are immediately placed to dry either in the sun or in hot air dryers. Considerably more time and equipment is needed for drying them in the wet process. When the fruits have been dried to a water content of about 12%, the seeds are mechanically freed from their coverings. The characteristic aroma and taste of coffee only appear later and are developed by the high temperatures to which they are subjected during the course of the process known as roasting. Temperatures are raised progressively to about 220 to 230 centigrades. This releases steam, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and other volatiles from the beans, resulting in a loss of weight of between 14 and 23%. Internal pressure of gas expands the volume of the coffee seeds from 30 to 100%. The seeds become rich brown in color, their texture becomes porous and crumbly under pressure. But the most important phenomenon of roasting is the appearance of the characteristic aroma of coffee, which arises from very complex chemical transformations within the beans. The coffee, on leaving the industrial roasters, is rapidly cooled in a vat where it is stirred and subjected to cold air propelled by a blower. Good quality coffees are then sorted by electronic sorters to eliminate the seeds that roasted badly. The presence of seeds which are either too light or too dark depreciates the quality. So this was the text. If you have not been able to complete your notes because of the time constraint, because of not being able to follow the speed with which I read and moved through the text, maybe at this stage, because you are practicing, you can go back to the text once again and you can read through the text once again quickly to check and to fill in the gaps in the notes that you have made. Once you are done with, please come to this slide. At this slide again a sample outline is provided, and you can see at the left indented side 4-5 main points are pointed out, whereas the details for that are created on the right side. So mainly the notes start with coffee plant and important information about it is jotted down. Evergreen shrub, small tree from Africa, fruits after 3-4 years, and the fruit is red or purple in color and is gathered by hand, processed to separate seeds from covering. Then the next main point is 2 processes used. One is wet process, the other is dry process. And you can notice that in front of this wet process all the details are summarized. In the same way, for the dry process all the details are summarized here. Then you see After giving the details of how it is roasted, what happens in terms of the release of gases, loss of waste, increase of volume, aroma and taste development, all the clues are given in a logical sequential order, which show how by passing through all these steps, coffee bean becomes richer in terms of color. It has a rich brown color, texture, and becomes porous. It has pores, and finally it is sorted out. So you see again this small piece of notes that is taken from the text and is organized in a certain way. It provides all the information that was embedded in the text by the writer. So at any time point when you look back at this single slide, you would recall the whole lesson. Otherwise, there are chances to forget certain things out of that. Dear students, we are moving towards the closure of today's session. Before I really close the session, I would quickly like to reiterate why is note-taking important for you. Because you become an active part of the learning process. You create a history of your course content. You keep on adding notes to the previous notes and thus create a series of notes put in a certain order that covers your whole course. And you have a written record to view or study later, especially for academic and examination purposes. And you reinforce what is communicated verbally. अगर आप notes लेते हैं तो in writing the notes actually you comprehend more as what is said or communicated orally, you translate it into a written form. Well, here are the lists of all those sources from where I have taken materials for this. You can also access these for further details if you are interested in. Before I close the session, I would quickly like to share a review of today's session. Our today's session was on note-taking or note-making. We started with what is note-taking. I introduced different types of note-taking, which included the Cornell format, the mind map format, and standard organized outline format. We also discussed advantages of note-taking and different strategies, steps and processes involved in how to take notes were shared. I showed you some examples of Cornell format, mind mapping and standard outline formats of note-taking. And towards the end of the session we had some activities where we tried to go through some material with the intention to prepare notes, and I showed you the sample notes for the activities as well. I hope it would help you in preparing your notes that you can make from all the readings that you do, as well as the sessions that you listen to, so that you could prepare for your exams, for your quizzes, assignments, or any other kind of academic activities. With this, we come to the end of the session. Thank you very much.